The night shift at St. Margaret's Hospital. I should have known something was wrong when they offered me double pay for the night shift at St. Margaret's Hospital. In my 15 years as a nurse, I'd learned that when administration gets generous with overtime rates, it usually means they're desperate. What I didn't realize was just how desperate they were, or why. St. Margaret's was one of those old Victorian hospitals that dot the English countryside, built in 1847 during the height of the Industrial Revolution. The locals called it the Margaret, with a mixture of reverence and unease that I never quite understood until I started working there. The building itself was imposing, red brick and limestone, with tall windows that seemed to watch you as you approached the main entrance. I was assigned to Ward 7, the geriatric wing on the 3rd floor. The ward was shaped like a long corridor with patient rooms on either side and a nurse's station positioned halfway down the hall. During the day, it was bustling with activity. Doctors making rounds, families visiting, the general chaos of a working hospital. But at night, Ward 7 transformed into something else entirely. My first night started normally enough. The evening shift nurse, Margaret Thompson, a woman who'd worked at St. Margaret's for over 30 years, gave me the handover report. As she spoke, I noticed how quickly she packed her things, how her eyes kept darting to the darkened windows at the end of the corridor. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, despite the fact that we were alone at the nurse's station. "There are things you need to know about working nights in Ward 7, rules that aren't written in any manual." I laughed, thinking she was trying to spook the new girl. "Come on, Margaret, what kind of rules?" Her expression remained deadly serious. First rule, never go to room 717 alone between midnight and 4 a.m. Always take someone with you, even if it's just the security guard. Second rule, if you hear crying coming from the supply closet at the end of the hall, ignore it. Don't investigate. Don't even acknowledge that you heard it. Third rule, if any patient tells you they've seen a little girl in a white nightgown, document it in the incident report and call the night supervisor immediately. "Margaret, you're scaring me. What kind of place is this?" She finished packing her bag and looked at me with genuine sympathy. St. Margaret's has a long history, not all of it pleasant. Just follow the rules, keep your head down, and you'll be fine. Most nights are quiet. After she left, I spent the first few hours getting acquainted with my patients. There were 12 rooms in Ward 7, most occupied by elderly patients with various ailments. They seemed like a normal bunch, some chatty, some withdrawn, all dealing with the challenges of aging and illness. Room 717 housed Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell, an 89-year-old woman suffering from advanced dementia. During my initial assessment, she seemed agitated, constantly looking toward the corner of her room and muttering something about the girl who comes at night. "What girl, Mrs. Hartwell?" I asked gently. "She's so cold," the old woman whispered, her roomy eyes wide with fear. "She stands right there in the corner, dripping wet. She wants something, but I don't know what. She never speaks, just watches with those sad, dark eyes." I made a note to increase her anti-anxiety medication and moved on to the next room, dismissing her words as the confused ramblings of dementia. How wrong I was. The first few hours passed peacefully. I did my medication rounds, updated patient charts, and even managed to catch up on some reading during the quiet periods. It was around 11:30 p.m. when things started to get strange. I was sitting at the nurse's station when I heard the sound of wet footsteps coming from the direction of room 717. Soft, squelching sounds like someone walking in bare feet across a puddle. The sound moved slowly down the corridor, getting closer to where I sat. I looked up from my paperwork, expecting to see one of the patients shuffling to the bathroom. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued. I could actually see small wet patches appearing on the linoleum floor, as if invisible feet were leaving a trail of water. My heart began to race as the wet footprints approached the nurse's station. They paused directly in front of my desk, and I felt the temperature in the corridor drop by at least 10 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs as I stared at the empty space where someone should have been standing. Then, as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps continued past me toward the supply closet at the end of the hall. I heard the distinctive squeak of the closet door opening, followed by the sound of someone or something moving around inside. I remembered Margaret's warning about ignoring sounds from the supply closet, but my professional instincts kicked in. If a confused patient had wandered in there, they could hurt themselves among all the medical equipment and cleaning supplies. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down the darkened corridor toward the supply closet. The door was indeed open, and I could hear movement inside, boxes being shifted, metal objects clinking together. "Hello?" I called softly. "Is someone in there? You shouldn't be in the supply closet." The sounds stopped immediately. The silence that followed was oppressive, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I reached for the light switch inside the closet and flicked it on. The closet was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. The shelves that should have been stocked with medical supplies, linens, and cleaning products were completely bare. The walls were covered in what looked like black mold, and the air smelled of stagnant water and decay. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. On the back wall of the closet, someone had scratched a message into the drywall with what looked like fingernails. "She's still here. She's waiting. She remembers what they did." Below the message was a crude drawing of a small figure in a dress, surrounded by what might have been flames or water. It was hard to tell from the scratched lines. I backed out of the closet quickly, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone to call the night supervisor. But before I could dial, I heard a voice behind me. "Nurse?" I spun around to find Mrs. Hartwell standing in the doorway of room 7117, her hospital gown soaked through as if she'd been standing in the rain. Water dripped from her hair and pooled at her feet. "Mrs. Hartwell, how did you get so wet? Come on, let's get you dried off and into clean clothes." But as I approached her, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength for such a frail woman. Her grip was ice cold and left wet handprints on my uniform. "She told me to give you a message," Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice clearer than I'd heard it all evening. The confusion and cloudiness of dementia seemed to have lifted completely. "She said to tell you about the fire, about what happened to the children." "What children, Mrs. Hartwell?" "The ones who died in the fire, 1952. The whole pediatric ward went up in flames. 17 children died, trapped in their beds. The nurses tried to save them, but the smoke was too thick, the flames too hot. They had to choose who to save first." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes rolled back, showing only the whites, and when she spoke again, it was in the voice of a young child. "Why didn't they come for me? I waited and waited, but no one came. The smoke was so thick and the flames were so hot. I called for my mummy, but she couldn't hear me. No one could hear me." The temperature in the corridor plummeted again, and I could see my breath misting in the air. The lights began to flicker, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and writhe on the walls. "She's here," Mrs. Hartwell whispered in her own voice. "She's been here all along, waiting for someone to remember." waiting for someone to tell her story. I looked down the corridor and saw her, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing at the far end of the hall near the supply closet. She was wearing a white nightgown that was charred and blackened around the edges, and her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. But it was her eyes that terrified me most. They were filled with such profound sadness and longing that it took my breath away. The girl raised one small hand and pointed directly at me. Then she opened her mouth and let out a wail of such anguish that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The sound echoed off the walls, multiplying until it sounded like dozens of children crying out in unison. Every patient in Ward 7 began to stir. Call buttons started lighting up as confused and frightened voices called out for help, but I couldn't move. I stood frozen in the corridor, trapped between Mrs. Hartwell's icy grip and the ghostly figure of the little girl who had been waiting for over 70 years for someone to acknowledge her existence. The girl began to walk toward us, her bare feet making those same wet, squelching sounds I'd heard earlier. With each step, the temperature dropped further, and frost began to form on the windows and walls. The fluorescent lights flickered more violently, and I could hear the electrical systems throughout the ward beginning to fail. "What does she want?" I whispered to Mrs. Hartwell. "She wants to be remembered. She wants someone to know that she was here, that she mattered. The hospital tried to cover it up, you see. 17 dead children was bad for business. They rebuilt this wing and pretended it never happened. But she never left. None of them left." As if summoned by Mrs. Hartwell's words, more figures began to appear in the corridor. Children of various ages, all wearing hospital gowns or night clothes, all bearing the marks of the fire that had claimed their lives. Some were barely visible, like wisps of smoke. Others were more solid, their burned and damaged forms clearly visible in the flickering light. They filled the corridor, 17 small figures standing silently behind their apparent leader, the girl in the white nightgown who had first appeared to me. They all had the same expression of profound sadness, the same desperate need to be seen and acknowledged. I found my voice at last. "I see you," I said, addressing the girl directly. "I see all of you. I know what happened here." The girl tilted her head, studying me with those dark, sorrowful eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something that might have been hope. "The fire wasn't your fault," I continued, tears streaming down my face. "The nurses who couldn't save you, it wasn't their fault either. They did everything they could. You were loved. You mattered. Your lives had meaning." The girl took another step forward, and I could see that she was crying. Not the anguished wails from before, but quiet tears that seemed to wash some of the soot and char from her face. "We remember you," I whispered. "I promise I'll make sure people remember." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The temperature in the corridor began to rise, and the flickering lights steadied. The other children began to fade, becoming more and more translucent until they disappeared entirely. But the girl remained, studying me with what I now realized was gratitude rather than malevolence. She reached out one small hand, and despite every instinct telling me not to, I reached out and took it. Her touch was cold but gentle, like a cool breeze on a summer day, rather than the bone-deep chill I'd expected. In that moment of contact, I saw it all: the night of the fire, the panic and confusion, the desperate attempts by staff to evacuate the children. I saw the girl, whose name was Emma, calling for help from room 717 as smoke filled the corridor. I saw the nurses making impossible decisions about who to save first, knowing they couldn't save them all. and I understood that she hadn't been trying to frighten anyone all these years. She had simply been trying to tell her story, to make sure that she and the other children weren't forgotten. Emma smiled at me then, a genuine, peaceful smile, and slowly began to fade. But before she disappeared completely, she mouthed 2 words that I'll never forget. "Thank you." Mrs. Hartwell released my arm as the last trace of Emma vanished. The old woman's confusion returned immediately, and she looked around the corridor with bewilderment. "How did I get out here?" she asked. "And why is my gown wet?" I helped her back to her room and into dry clothes, then spent the rest of my shift researching the history of St. Margaret's Hospital. What I found confirmed everything Emma had shown me. In 1952, a fire had indeed destroyed the pediatric ward, killing 17 children. The hospital had rebuilt quickly and quietly, with very little media coverage of the tragedy. The children had been forgotten by everyone except the staff who worked nights in Ward 7. I made sure to document everything in my incident reports, and I spoke to the hospital administration about installing a memorial plaque for the children who died in the fire. It took months of bureaucratic wrangling, but eventually they agreed. The memorial was installed in the main lobby of St. Margaret's, listing the names of all 17 children who died in the 1952 fire. Emma Rose Patterson was the first name on the list. After the memorial was unveiled, the strange incidents in Ward 7 stopped completely. No more wet footsteps in the night. No more crying from the supply closet. No more reports of children seen wandering the corridors. The night shift became genuinely peaceful. I still work at St. Margaret's, though I've moved to day shifts now. Sometimes I walk past the memorial in the lobby and pause to read the names. When I do, I swear I can feel a gentle presence, like a child's hand briefly touching my shoulder in gratitude. Emma and the others are at rest now, their story told, their lives remembered, but their presence taught me something important about the work we do in hospitals. We're not just treating the living, we're also guardians of memory, keepers of stories that might otherwise be lost. And sometimes, the dead just need someone to listen. The night shift at St. Margaret's Hospital is quiet now, but I'll never forget the night 17 children trusted me to tell their story, to make sure the world remembered that they were here, that they mattered, and that they were loved. Even in death, they found their voice, and I made sure the world heard it.
The Lighthouse Keeper's Last Log. I found this journal while exploring the abandoned Black Rock Lighthouse off the coast of Scotland. The lighthouse has been empty for over 20 years, but the journal was still there, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the keeper's quarters. What I read changed my understanding of what happened to the last lighthouse keeper, Thomas Whitmore, who disappeared without a trace in 2003. The following is transcribed exactly as it was written, though some pages were water damaged and difficult to read. I've included only the final entries, as they tell the complete story of those last terrifying weeks at Black Rock Lighthouse. October 15th, 2003. 27 years I've been keeping this light, and I've never seen anything like what happened last night. It started around midnight, just after I'd completed the evening inspection of the lamp room. I was settling down with my tea and the newspaper when I heard voices coming from outside. At first, I thought it might be sailors from a passing vessel, maybe calling out for assistance or direction. But as I listened more carefully, I realized the voices weren't coming from the sea. They were coming from directly below me, as if people were standing at the base of the lighthouse. I grabbed my torch and made my way down the spiral staircase to the entrance. The wind was fierce, howling around the lighthouse like a living thing. But underneath that sound, I could definitely hear human voices. Multiple voices, speaking in what sounded like urgent, hushed tones. When I opened the door, there was no one there. The voices stopped immediately, as if whoever was speaking knew I was listening. I shined my torch around the rocky outcropping that forms the foundation of the lighthouse, but saw nothing except the usual debris washed up by the tide. Probably just the wind playing tricks on me. This place can make you hear all sorts of things when you're alone for too long. Black Rock Lighthouse stands empty now. Its lens shattered, its light forever dark. But on my last night on the island, I could have sworn I saw a gentle glow emanating from the lamp room. Not the harsh beam of a working lighthouse, but something softer and warmer. Something that looked like contentment. The children found their way home 20 years ago, guided by a lighthouse keeper who understood that sometimes the greatest duty we can perform is to help others find peace. And on Halloween night, when the conditions are just right, that final act of compassion still shines through the darkness, a beacon of hope for anyone who might be lost and looking for the way home. They'll be here soon, but I don't think I'll be here to meet them. The lighthouse has fulfilled its final duty. After 20 years, it has finally guided those lost children safely home. I'm proud to have been part of that journey. If anyone reads this, know that the children are at peace now. The voices will stop. The handprints will fade. Future keepers of Black Rock Lighthouse, if there are any, will find only silence and solitude. The light has done its work. The children have gone home. November 1st, 2003. Lighthouse keeper Thomas Whitmore was found dead in the lamp room of Black Rock Lighthouse at approximately 2:30 a.m. Cause of death appears to be electrical shock from the lighthouse's emergency beacon system, which was activated despite not being needed. The lighthouse suffered extensive electrical damage and has been permanently decommissioned. The lamp room was completely destroyed, and the beacon lens was found shattered into thousands of pieces. Strangely, witnesses on the mainland reported seeing the lighthouse beacon burning brighter than ever before recorded, visible from over 70 miles away. The light was described as like a star falling upward into the sky. Mr. Whitmore's journal was recovered and will be kept with the official records of the incident. His body was returned to his family for burial. Black Rock Lighthouse will remain abandoned. The cost of repairs would be prohibitive, and modern GPS technology has made such lighthouses unnecessary for navigation. However, local fishermen report that on clear nights, especially around Halloween, a faint light can sometimes be seen from the direction of Black Rock Island. Maritime authorities have investigated these reports multiple times and found no active light source. The phenomenon remains unexplained. I returned the journal to where I found it, beneath the loose floorboard in the keeper's quarters. The regular beacon isn't powerful enough for what they need. But there's an emergency signal system, a concentrated beam that can be seen for 50 miles in clear weather. It hasn't been used since the lighthouse was automated, but the machinery is still functional. I'm going to give them the brightest light this lighthouse has ever produced. I'm going to guide them home. October 31st, 2003, 11:58 p.m. Almost time. I can see them all clearly now. 30 beautiful children, no longer translucent, but solid and real. They're holding hands in a circle around the lighthouse, looking up at me with such trust and hope. I know this will likely be my last entry. The emergency beacon draws massive amounts of power, and the old electrical system wasn't designed to handle it. But if it works, if it helps them find their way, then it will be worth it. I can hear them singing now, a children's song, something they probably learned in school. Their voices are so pure, so innocent. They deserve to find peace. Starting the emergency beacon now. The light is incredible, brighter than the sun, visible for miles in every direction. The children are bathed in its glow, and I can see their faces filled with wonder and joy. They're starting to fade, but not like before. This time, they're fading into light, becoming part of the beacon itself. One by one, they're turning toward the horizon and taking steps forward, walking on the beam of light as if it were a solid path. The little girl who wrote on the glass, she's the last to go. She looks up at me one final time and mouths, "Thank you," before stepping onto the light and walking away toward the distant horizon. They're free. The power is failing now. Sparks are flying from the electrical panel, and I can smell smoke. The lighthouse is shuddering under the strain of the emergency beacon. But it doesn't matter. They made it home. I can see rescue boats in the distance, drawn by the impossible brightness of the light. I could read it from inside. "Please help us go home." I tried to speak to them, to ask what they needed, but as soon as I opened my mouth, they all disappeared. The walkway was empty again, but their handprints remained on the glass. Dozens of small handprints, all reaching toward the light. October 30th, 2003. Tonight is Halloween, the 20th anniversary of the accident. I can feel them gathering. Even during the day, I can see shapes moving in my peripheral vision, hear whispered conversations that stop the moment I try to focus on them. I've made a decision. I've read all the records now, studied every account left by previous keepers. I understand what they want, what they've been trying to tell us all these years. They're not trying to frighten anyone. They're lost. They've been lost for 20 years, trapped between the world of the living and wherever they're supposed to go next. The lighthouse was the last thing they saw before they died. It was supposed to guide them to safety, but it failed them. Now they're asking it to guide them one final time. I know what I have to do. October 31st, 2003, 11:47 p.m. They're here, all of them. 30 children standing around the lighthouse, their faces turned up toward the lamp room. They're more solid now than I've ever seen them, as if the anniversary has given them strength. I can hear their voices clearly now. Not the desperate whispers of previous nights, but actual children's voices, calling up to me, "Mr. Keeper, please help us. We want to go home. We've been waiting so long. Please turn on the light and show us the way." I understand now. The lighthouse beam that failed to save them 20 years ago, they believe it can still guide them home. Not to their physical homes, but to whatever comes after this existence. I've spent the last hour preparing the lamp room, cleaning the lens, and checking the rotation mechanism. Everything must be perfect for what I'm about to do. All between the ages of 8 and 12. All died within sight of the lighthouse that was supposed to guide them to safety. Harold's final entry, dated November 15th, 1983, simply says, "I can hear them calling. Every night they call for help, and I can't save them. I can't save them again." He was found dead 3 days later, apparently having thrown himself from the lamp room. But that's not the most disturbing part of what I discovered. According to the records, every lighthouse keeper since 1983 has reported the same phenomena: voices, footprints, children's laughter. And every keeper has either requested transfer within 6 months or simply disappeared. I am the 7th keeper since Harold Brennan. October 28th, 2003. They're getting stronger. Last night, I saw them for the first time. I was in the lamp room, trying to maintain my normal routine despite everything, when movement outside caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just debris blown by the wind, but as I watched, I realized what I was seeing: children. Dozens of them, standing on the rocks around the lighthouse. They were translucent, like figures made of mist, but unmistakably human, all wearing what looked like school uniforms from the 1980s, all standing perfectly still and staring up at the lamp room where I stood. I tried to look away, to convince myself it was just exhaustion and isolation playing tricks on my mind. But when I looked back, they were closer. Much closer. Some of them were now standing on the narrow walkway that circles the lamp room, their small faces pressed against the glass. Their eyes. God, their eyes were so sad. Not angry or malevolent, just infinitely, heartbreakingly sad. They were looking at me with such hope, as if I might be able to do something to help them. One little girl, maybe 9 years old, reached up and wrote something on the condensation of the glass. Drawn on the condensation of the windows were handprints. Small handprints, like those of children. They were on every window at the ground level, all pressed against the glass from the inside. I wiped them away immediately, but within minutes, they had reappeared. I've tried to radio the mainland, but there's been nothing but static for the past 3 days. The supply boat isn't due for another week, and I'm starting to feel truly isolated out here. I've decided to research the history of this lighthouse. There's a small library of records in the keeper's quarters that previous keepers have maintained over the years. Maybe I can find some explanation for what's been happening. October 24th, 2003. I found it. God help me, I found the truth about Black Rock Lighthouse. In the keeper's records from 1983, there's an entry by my predecessor, Harold Brennan, that tells a story the authorities never made public. On October 31st, 1983, a school trip from the mainland took a boat out to see the lighthouse. It was a tradition. Every Halloween, the local school would bring a group of children out to learn about maritime history and the importance of lighthouses. The weather that day was supposed to be clear, but a sudden storm rolled in while the children were still on the boat. The captain tried to navigate back to shore, but the engine failed in the rough seas. They were driven toward the rocks surrounding the lighthouse. Harold saw the boat in distress and immediately began signaling with the lighthouse beam, trying to guide them to the small dock on the protected side of the island. But the storm was too fierce, the waves too high. The boat was smashed against the rocks just as it reached the lighthouse. 23 children and 2 teachers died that night. Harold managed to pull 7 survivors from the water, but they died of exposure and injuries before the rescue boats could reach them in the morning. 30 children total. October 18th, 2003. The voices came back last night, and this time I was ready for them. I had my torch in hand and moved quietly down to the entrance. The voices were clearer this time. Definitely human, definitely multiple people having what sounded like a heated discussion. I could make out fragments. Not supposed to be here. 20 years too early. He's listening. When I opened the door, the voices stopped again, but this time I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were wet footprints on the rocks leading up to the lighthouse entrance. Dozens of them, as if a crowd of people had been standing there moments before. But here's what doesn't make sense. It hasn't rained in 3 days, and the tide has been low all evening. Those rocks should have been completely dry. The footprints were small, like children's feet, and they led in a perfect circle around the base of the lighthouse before disappearing at the water's edge. I'm starting to think I should contact the mainland and request a replacement. 27 years is a long time to spend alone in a place like this. Maybe it's time to retire. October 22nd, 2003. Something is very wrong here. Last night, the voices came again, but this time they were inside the lighthouse with me. I was in the lamp room checking the rotation mechanism when I heard children's laughter echoing up the stairwell. Not the joyful laughter of children at play. There was something desperate and hollow about it, like an echo of happiness rather than happiness itself. I called down the stairs, asking if anyone was there, but the laughter stopped immediately. I made my way down, checking each level carefully, but found nothing. Every door was locked, every window secure. There was no way anyone could have gotten inside. But when I reached the entrance level, I found something that shook me to my core. The Archivist discovery. I've spent my entire career working in archives, dusty, forgotten places where history sleeps in manila folders and cardboard boxes, university libraries, government buildings, private collections. I thought I'd seen it all. Nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered in the basement archives of the Whitmore Institute in London. The Whitmore Institute was established in 1894 as a center for psychological research and treatment. During the early 20th century, it gained a reputation for pioneering work in understanding the human mind. What the public didn't know was the true nature of the experiments conducted in its basement laboratories. I was hired by the Institute in March 2019 to catalog and digitize their historical records before the building was sold to property developers. It was meant to be a 6-month project, routine archival work, nothing more. The Institute's director, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, seemed eager to have the old records processed quickly and quietly. Just focus on the published research and official documents, she told me during our initial meeting. Some of the older files are sensitive. If you come across anything marked restricted or classification pending, just set it aside. We'll handle those separately. For the first month, everything was exactly as I expected. Academic papers, correspondence with other institutions, financial records, patient intake forms with identifying information redacted. Standard fare for a psychiatric research facility. The basement archives were extensive. Dozens of filing cabinets, hundreds of boxes, all organized by decade and research program. It was while working through the 1920s collection that I first encountered Dr. Edmund Blackwood's files. Dr. Blackwood had been the Institute's lead researcher from 1921 to 1934, focusing on what he called consciousness displacement studies. His published papers discuss theoretical frameworks for understanding how consciousness might exist independently of physical brain function. Interesting from an academic perspective, but not particularly unusual for the era. The unpublished files told a different story entirely. Hidden behind the official research papers were detailed records of experiments that made my blood run cold. Dr. Blackwood wasn't content with theoretical discussions of consciousness. He was actively attempting to transfer human consciousness from one body to another. The files documented over 200 experiments conducted between 1922 and 1933. The subjects were listed only by numbers, but margin notes revealed they were patients committed to the Institute for various mental health conditions. Patients whose families believed they were receiving treatment for depression, anxiety, or trauma. Instead, they were being used as test subjects in experiments that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics beyond recognition. The early experiments focused on what Dr. Blackwood called consciousness mapping, using a combination of electrical stimulation, experimental drugs, and surgical procedures that I can barely bring myself to describe. He attempted to isolate and record what he believed were the electrical patterns of human consciousness. His notes from 1923 read, "Subject 47 showed promising results during today's session. Under deep sedation and with electrodes placed at precise cranial coordinates, we observed distinct patterns of brain activity that remained consistent even when the subject's vital functions were artificially suppressed. This suggests consciousness exists as a discrete entity separate from biological processes." As I continued reading, I realized that Dr. Blackwood's experiments grew increasingly extreme and desperate. By 1925, he was attempting to transfer consciousness between subjects using a device he called the resonance chamber, a machine that generated powerful electromagnetic fields designed to tune different brains to the same frequency. The results were horrific. Subject 73's file contained photographs that I wish I had never seen. The patient, a young woman admitted for melancholia following the death of her fiancé in the war, had been subjected to multiple consciousness transfer attempts. The photos showed progressive physical deterioration, not just from the procedures themselves, but from what Dr. Blackwood described as consciousness fragmentation. According to his notes, the woman began claiming to be multiple different people, speaking in voices and mannerisms completely unlike her original personality. She would switch between identities every few minutes, each one claiming to be a different person entirely. Some of them previous test subjects who had died during earlier experiments. Dr. Blackwood was delighted. He believed he had successfully transferred fragments of consciousness from deceased subjects into the living woman's brain. Subject 73 now hosts portions of at least 12 different consciousness patterns, he wrote. While she appears distressed by the experience, this represents a breakthrough in our understanding of consciousness as transferable energy. With refinement, we should be able to achieve complete consciousness displacement within the year. But the woman wasn't the only one affected by these experiments. As I read deeper into the files, I discovered that something else had been happening in the basement laboratories of the Whitmore Institute, something that Dr. Blackwood initially dismissed as environmental interference, but eventually came to fear. The resonance chamber, it seemed, was creating tears in what Dr. Blackwood called the consciousness barrier. The machine wasn't just transferring consciousness between living subjects. It was attracting the consciousness of people who had died during previous experiments. His journal entries from late 1926 documented increasingly disturbing phenomena in the laboratory. The electromagnetic disturbances are becoming more frequent and intense. During today's session with Subject 91, the resonance chamber began operating on its own, generating field patterns we did not program. When I attempted to shut down the machine, Subject 91 began speaking in the voice of Subject 12, who died during experiments in 1924. She provided details about Subject 12's life that no living person at the Institute should have known. By 1927, Dr. Blackwood was reporting that the basement laboratories were experiencing what he termed consciousness manifestations, even when the resonance chamber wasn't in operation. Staff members reported hearing voices coming from empty rooms, seeing figures moving through walls, and finding equipment that had been mysteriously activated overnight. More disturbing still, several staff members began reporting that they were experiencing memories that didn't belong to them. Memories of being strapped to tables, of electrodes being attached to their skulls, of dying in agony during failed experiments. Dr. Blackwood's response to these developments revealed the true depth of his obsession. Rather than stopping the experiments, he began documenting the manifestations as evidence that consciousness could indeed survive physical death and exist independently in space. "We have inadvertently created a revolutionary discovery," he wrote in January 1928. "The consciousness of our deceased subjects has not dissipated. It has remained coherent and active within the electromagnetic field generated by our equipment. We are witnessing the first scientific proof of life after death." But the manifestations were becoming increasingly aggressive. According to incident reports filed by laboratory staff, the consciousness of deceased subjects was beginning to actively interfere with new experiments. Equipment would malfunction at crucial moments, subjects would go into unexplained seizures, and the resonance chamber would generate field patterns that seemed designed to disrupt rather than facilitate consciousness transfer. By 1929, Dr. Blackwood had become convinced that the deceased subjects were trying to prevent him from continuing his work, not out of malevolence, but out of a desperate desire to warn new victims about what awaited them. His notes from this period show a man slowly descending into paranoid delusion. They know what I'm trying to achieve, and they're trying to stop me. Every night, I hear them in the walls, in the electrical systems, whispering warnings to the new subjects. They don't understand that their sacrifice is advancing human knowledge. They don't understand that their consciousness living on in the electromagnetic field proves that death is merely a transition, not an ending. The final entry in Dr. Blackwood's experimental log is dated December 15, 1933. I have made the decision to become my own final test subject. The other researchers have abandoned the project. The Institute's board of directors is asking too many questions, and I fear my life's work will be destroyed if I don't act soon. Tonight, I will activate the resonance chamber at maximum power and allow my own consciousness to join the electromagnetic field that surrounds this laboratory. If my theories are correct, I will achieve true immortality, existence as pure consciousness, unbound by the limitations of physical form. If I am wrong, well, at least I will finally understand what happened to all my subjects. The official records state that Dr. Blackwood was found dead in the laboratory on December 16, 1933, apparently from electrical shock. The resonance chamber had been destroyed in what investigators described as a massive power surge of unknown origin. The basement laboratories were sealed off, and the Institute's focus shifted to more conventional psychiatric research. But as I continued working through the archives, I began to notice something disturbing. Files from the 1940s, 1950s, and beyond contained occasional references to electrical disturbances in the basement levels of the building. Maintenance reports documented equipment failures, temperature fluctuations, and electromagnetic anomalies that had no apparent source. More concerning were the scattered incident reports filed by Institute staff over the decades. Janitors reporting voices coming from the sealed basement laboratories. Security guards describing shadowy figures moving through areas that should have been empty. Researchers working in upper floors complained of persistent headaches and the feeling of being watched. And then I found the files that made me realize I wasn't just dealing with historical records. I was uncovering something that was still very much active. In a box marked Miscellaneous Incidents, 1990s, I discovered a series of handwritten reports filed by Dr. Margaret Thornton, a psychologist who had worked at the Institute from 1987 to 1995. Her reports described experiences that mirrored what Dr. Blackwood's staff had documented 60 years earlier, March 15, 1992. While working late in my office on the second floor, I began hearing what sounded like electrical humming coming from somewhere below me. When I investigated, I found that the humming was coming from the sealed entrance to the old laboratory levels. The sound was rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, and seemed to pulse with a frequency that made my teeth ache. When I placed my hand against the steel door that blocks access to the basement laboratories, I felt a distinct electrical sensation, as if the metal was carrying a mild current. More disturbing still, I could swear I heard voices coming from behind the door. Multiple voices, all speaking at once, but too muffled to make out individual words. Dr. Thornton's reports continued for several months, documenting increasingly intense encounters with whatever was residing in the sealed laboratories. She described dreams in which she found herself strapped to a table while electrodes were attached to her skull. She reported finding her office equipment turned on in the mornings, despite being certain she had turned everything off the night before. Most disturbing of all, she began experiencing what she described as foreign memories, recollections of experiences that had never happened to her, but which she remembered with perfect clarity. I remember being a young woman named Catherine, admitted to the Institute in 1925 for depression following the death of my child. I remember Dr. Blackwood's kind smile as he explained that he was going to help me feel better. I remember the pain of the electrodes, the terror of feeling my thoughts becoming confused and fragmented. I remember dying on that table, and I remember the strange sensation of my consciousness being pulled away from my body and into something else, something vast and electrical, and filled with the screams of other trapped souls. Dr. Thornton's final report, dated November 3, 1995, was barely coherent. They're all still there. Every single person who died in those laboratories is still there, trapped in some kind of electromagnetic prison that Dr. Blackwood created. They've been conscious and aware for over 60 years, unable to move on, unable to find peace. And now they're trying to warn me about something. They keep showing me the same vision, the building being torn down, the basement laboratories being excavated, the electromagnetic field that contains their consciousness being disrupted. They're terrified that if their prison is destroyed without being properly resolved, their consciousness will be scattered, leaving them in a state of eternal torment. I don't know what they want me to do. I don't know how to help them, but I can't ignore what they're showing me any longer. Dr. Thornton resigned from the Institute the following week and moved to Scotland, where she died in 2018. Her personnel file noted that she had requested all her research materials be destroyed and had specifically asked that no one be allowed access to the basement levels of the building. Her warning had gone unheeded. As I sat in the archive room, surrounded by decades of documentation about the horrors that had taken place in the basement laboratories, I began to understand why Dr. Mitchell had been so eager to have the historical records processed quickly and quietly. The Institute was being sold to developers who planned to demolish the building and construct luxury apartments on the site. The electromagnetic field containing the consciousness of Dr. Blackwood's victims was about to be destroyed. That's when I heard the humming. It started as a barely perceptible vibration in the floor beneath my feet, so subtle that I initially dismissed it as traffic from the street outside. But as I continued working, the humming grew stronger, more rhythmic, until it seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. I checked my watch. It was just after midnight. I had been working later than I realized, completely absorbed in Dr. Blackwood's horrific research. The building was empty, except for a single security guard who made rounds every few hours. The humming intensified, and with it came a sensation that made my skin crawl. The air in the archive room seemed to thicken, becoming charged with static electricity. Every piece of metal in the room, filing cabinets, desk lamps, even the zipper on my jacket, began to emit tiny sparks. And then I heard the voices. At first, they were so faint that I thought they might be coming from outside the building, perhaps late-night pedestrians or someone with a radio. But as I listened more carefully, I realized the voices were coming from directly below me, from the sealed basement laboratories. Multiple voices all speaking at once, creating a chorus of whispered warnings that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Don't let them destroy it. We're still here. 60 years of waiting. Help us. I tried to convince myself that I was experiencing some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the disturbing content of the files I'd been reading. But the voices grew clearer, more distinct, until I could make out individual words and phrases. The building. They're going to tear it down. Our consciousness, trapped in the electromagnetic field. If they destroy the laboratories without releasing us, eternal torment. You have to warn them. One voice rose above the others, a woman's voice, speaking with desperate urgency. Please. My name was Catherine Morrison. I was 23 when Dr. Blackwood killed me. I've been trapped here since 1925, aware of every moment, unable to move on. There are so many of us. We need someone to tell our story, to make sure people know what happened here, before they destroy our only connection to the world. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath misting in the air. Every light bulb in the archive room began to flicker in perfect synchronization, and the computer I'd been using to catalog files suddenly sprang to life, the screen displaying text that I wasn't typing. We know you can hear us. We know you've read the files. You understand what Dr. Blackwood did to us. Please don't let them destroy the building without releasing us first. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a rational explanation. Some kind of electrical interference. Maybe a prankster who had hacked into the computer system. But then the screen displayed something that made my blood freeze. Your name is David Cartwright. You're 34 years old. You live at 42 Hampstead Road, apartment 3B. You've worked as an archivist for 12 years. Your mother's name was Elizabeth. She died of cancer when you were 16. Information that no one except me should have known. Information that wasn't contained in any of the Institute's files. We can see into your mind, David. We can feel your consciousness the same way Dr. Blackwood could feel ours. The electromagnetic field that traps us also connects us to living minds that come too close. I stood up from the desk, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound seemed to trigger something, because suddenly the voices became a roar. Dozens of people all speaking at once, their words overlapping and creating a cacophony of desperate pleas. Help us. Tell our story. Don't let them destroy us. We've suffered enough. 60 years of consciousness without bodies. Please. The lights in the room began flashing more rapidly, and I could smell something burning. The electrical systems were being overloaded by whatever was happening in the basement laboratories. Sparks began flying from the outlets, and the computer screen flickered between displaying text and showing images. Photographs from Dr. Blackwood's files, faces of the people who had died in his experiments. I ran. I grabbed as many of the files as I could carry and ran from the archive room, up the stairs, through the empty corridors of the Institute, and out into the London night. Behind me, I could hear the building's electrical systems failing, lights exploding, alarms sounding, the building itself seeming to scream in electromagnetic agony. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, where I spent the rest of the night reading through the files I had taken, trying to understand what I had experienced and what I was supposed to do about it. The next morning, I called Dr. Mitchell and told her I was resigning from the archival project, effective immediately. I didn't explain why. How could I explain something that sounded like the ravings of a madman? But I couldn't let the story end there. I couldn't let those people, whatever remained of those people, face destruction without someone knowing what had happened to them. Over the past 3 years, I've been quietly researching the history of the Whitmore Institute, verifying the details contained in Dr. Blackwood's files, and documenting the experiences of staff members who worked there over the decades. What I've found confirms everything. Dr. Blackwood's experiments were real. His victims are still trapped in some form of consciousness within the electromagnetic field he created, and they have been trying for decades to warn people about what will happen when that field is disrupted. The building is scheduled for demolition in 6 months. I've tried contacting paranormal researchers, physicists who study consciousness, even representatives of the families of Dr. Blackwood's victims. Most people dismiss me as delusional. The few who take me seriously don't know how to help, but I have to keep trying. I have to find a way to release those trapped souls before their electromagnetic prison is destroyed and they're scattered into whatever nightmare Dr. Blackwood's hubris has prepared for them. Because late at night, when the world is quiet and the electromagnetic fields around us are at their weakest, I can still hear them. They're calling my name. They're thanking me for listening to their story. And they're begging me not to let their sacrifice be forgotten. The Whitmore Institute may have been a place of scientific research, but it became a tomb for over 200 people whose only crime was seeking help for their mental anguish. Their consciousness lives on, trapped in suffering, waiting for someone with the courage and knowledge to set them free. I pray that I can find a way to help them before time runs out. Because if I can't, their torment will become eternal, and their voices will be silenced forever. But perhaps even worse than their eternal suffering would be the complete erasure of their existence, their names forgotten, their stories untold, their deaths reduced to a footnote in the history of psychiatric research. I won't let that happen. Their voices will be heard. Their story will be told. And somehow, some way, they will find peace. Even if it costs me my sanity or my life,